Hi there. We're going to start with the max or min of a quadratic function. So we're first going to go over the different forms of a quadratic equation and then how to complete the square as well. And for these, the Jensen handout, I'm going to go over the first 5 pages. And we're not going to include partial factoring in the lesson. That will be extra if you're interested. So the first part for the vertex form, so this means for the parent form of a quadratic, y equals x squared, it can be written in 3 different ways. So in the vertex form, the equation looks like this. And the information we can get from it is we get the vertex, where the vertex is your h and your k coordinate, h and your k. The axis of symmetry, the value that splits it in half, would be the x coordinate of the vertex. So we would say x equals h. And then if your a value is greater than 0, then the parabola has a minimum and it's upward facing. If the a value is negative, or less than 0, then the quadratic has a maximum and it's downward facing. Like this. So you can see this one here is an upward facing parabola. And we have the vertex here at x equals 2 and y equals 3. So then given that, if we fill it into the general form of the equation, just a moment, given the general form of the equation, then we have y equals a x minus 2 squared plus k, which your k is 3. So that means your vertex is 2, 3. Your a is going to be positive because it's an upward facing parabola and there's a minimum point on it. Now in order to find the a value, we find another point on the parabola. We see 2 clear ones right here. We substitute one of them in to solve for y. So for example, this point here we can see is 0, 7. So now in order to solve for a, I'm going to substitute this in for the x and the y value. So your y is 7. Then we have 0 minus 2 squared plus 3. So 7 equals a. And then minus 2 squared is 4. Plus 3. Subtract 3 from both sides. These cancel out. So we end up with 4 equals 4a. Divide both sides by 4. And then you can see your a is 1. So that means that this parabola is represented by the equation y equals x minus 2 squared, plus 3. All right, so that was a very brief introduction to vertex form. The next form is factored form. And what this tells us is the zeros of the equation. Zeros means the x-intercepts. So for example, this would be one of them, and this would be the other one. So if we were to fill that in, so zeros of the equation. The a has the same interpretation as in the previous equation, meaning we know this a is going to be positive because it's an upward facing parabola and it has a minimum value. The minimum's not as nice as the other one, so we're going to use the zeros. So I can see here, let's say my r is equal to -3 and my s is equal to 2. And I fill that into the equation. We have x minus -3 times x minus 2. And we simplify that. We know the negative and the negative would become positive. So now we have x plus 3 and x minus 2. Just like we found restrictions when we did rational expressions in the first unit, we can see if we set this to 0, x minus 3 would make that 0. So that's how we get that value here. That's what would make this equation equal to 0. Now what we also need at this point is another point. So here's a nice point, here's a nice point, to sub in for x and y to solve for a. So here this would be 1, -2. So what we do here is we would have -2 for the y, and then anywhere we see x, we replace it with 1. So 1 plus 3, 1 minus 2. And then we're going to solve for a. So we have 4 times -1. So then we have -2 equals -4a. Divide both sides by -4. So then we have 1/2 is equal to a. So therefore, this equation for this parabola would be y equals 1/2 times x plus 3, x minus 2. And this a, just like our transformations, this implies the stretch factor. Or in this terms, it's compressed by a factor of 1/2. All right. Now this final form of the quadratic is called standard form. And in this case, the c is the y-intercept. So for this curve, you can see it intercepts the y-intercept at -2. So then we know this would be -2. For this one, I'm going to leave it for now, how we're going to solve the rest, because I want to do completing the square first. But just to point out, if you wanted to find the roots, so there's a few different ways, a couple different ways you can do it. You can use some of your factoring techniques that we used in our first unit, and you can also use the quadratic formula to find the factors. Also use the quadratic formula to find the roots. So you'd like to get it, let's say, into factored form. Use the quadratic formula to find the roots or the zeros or the x-intercepts. For the factored form. And then you'd have to solve for the a. Or you can complete the square, and that's going to be our next section, next video. Complete the square. To get the vertex form of the equation. So look out for the next video. Thanks.